On the instructions of Gurudev today, and with his mercy, we will read together Prabhupada's introduction to Canto 1 of Srimad Bhagavatam. This is ordinarily our dear Gurvani's class, and he's occupied with other things in other places today. So Gurudev asked me to fill the great void he leaves behind with a reading and some meditation on this wonderful 3 pages of Prabhupada. So very inspired and so very important. If you've been listening often to Gurudev the last 1 year or maybe 2 years, then you know how much he loves this small introduction that Prabhupada made to the first canto of Bhagavatam. And he's many times explained the very first lines of it and dug deep and dove deep into the richness of these lines. So today we'll try to carry that mood further, continue to go deep, and actually continue the reading past the first few lines and see what we can discover along the way. And we'll hope that the power stays on for 1 hour and 1/2. It's never a guarantee. Maybe a word about Srimad Bhagavatam, since we have a bit of time and we can orient ourselves in what this text is and what it means and where it fits into the great puzzle of texts in the Indian tradition. There are 4 main classes of texts in Indian history. And now I'm talking way back to the thousands of years before the modern era. There are 4 different classes. The first 2 classes are more like literature and mythology. And the second class are more like theology and philosophy. So the first 2 you've heard of, I'm sure, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. The Mahabharata is a many volume story about the Kurukshetra war, of which Bhagavad Gita is a tiny part. The Ramayana is the also very long, many books long story of Ram, therefore the name Ramayana, the life of Ram, the great prince of Ayodhya, exiled from his kingdom, and it's about the abduction of his wife, Sita, by the demon Ravana, and you might have heard these stories, and the rescue of Sita with the help of the monkey king Hanuman. So it's the main story where Hanuman plays an important part. Those are the 2 very big, very long, more literary works of Indian culture. And then there are 2 more theological or philosophical works, and these are, of course, the Vedas and the Puranas. The Vedas are very old too, and very long, and very numerous in pages and verses. Some say they go back to 1,500 years before the modern time, and some say it's more recent, a little bit more recent. But we all agree that they're very old. And you might know that there are 4 key texts of the Vedas. There are 4 different Vedas. These are the Rig Veda, the Samaveda, the Yajura Veda, and the Atharva Veda. 4 different Vedas. And each of the Vedas has a part which is more philosophical called the Upanishad. And together these Upanishads, put them all together in one set of texts, and they are called the Vedanta. So, in other words, the Vedanta are all the books that condense the philosophy of the Vedas. And then finally, the Puranas, which are much more recent than the Vedas, but also around the year zero of the modern era. And these are, like I said, more like philosophy and ethics and moral teachings. And these are mostly three kinds: the Brahma Puranas, the Shiva Puranas, and the Vaishnava Puranas. And now we come to our object. The Srimad Bhagavatam is called also, you probably know, the Bhagavat Purana. So it's one of the Puranas. It's one of the Vaishnava Puranas. So that's where Bhagavatam fits. And some people say that of all the Puranas, the Bhagavatam is the nectar. So if you squeeze all the juice, condense all the juice of all the Vaishnavas, all the Puranas of the Vaishnava Puranas, then you get the Bhagavatam. It's the most condensed and rich and beautiful of all the Puranas. It's the ripened fruit, the rasa of all the Vedas. It's not, we don't know who wrote it, but it's compiled, it's put together, the text by a very famous author called Vyasadeva. And he was responsible for many texts. He was also responsible for the Mahabharata and others. So we sometimes see the name Vyasadeva in the commentary by Prabhupada, and sometimes even in the verses we see the name of the author of the Bhagavatam. In our tradition, in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, we consider the Bhagavatam as the direct representation of God, and the highest, the purest, and the most direct representation of God. Like I said a moment ago, the condensed form of God. So the words of Bhagavatam, it is said, are the divine. The words of Bhagavatam are identical to Krishna. And I'll come back in a minute to why we say Krishna already and not some other god like Vishnu. So, to put it really quickly, Srimad Bhagavatam is the foundation of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and it's also the foundation of Chaitanya Charitamrita, the story, the intellectual and spiritual history of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And now, as you can hear, we're kind of circling in closer and closer to Mahaprabhu, from way out in the universe of all the texts, to the philosophical texts, to the condensed philosophical texts, to the texts that form the background of Vaishnavism, to the texts that form the background of Gaudiya or Bengali Vaishnavism. And now really we see that Srimad Bhagavatam is the heart of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And we know this partly because it's cited all over the place in Chaitanya Charitamrita. It's cited and commented and discussed and thought about everywhere. And then also the main books of the Goswamis, like Rupa Goswami and Jiva Goswami and Sanatana Goswami, these main writers of the Gaudiya tradition, they spend lots and lots of time reading and meditating on Srimad Bhagavatam, and then they often cite it. So, for example, if you open the pages of Rupa Goswami's famous Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, just about every verse is a quotation of Bhagavatam with an explanation in terms of bhakti. So if you become interested in this Bhagavatam and want to learn how we connect the Bhagavatam to our tradition of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, then it's everywhere in the books of the Goswamis. It's really the foundation. And what we see when we read the Goswamis and what we see when we read the Chaitanya Charitamrita is these authors opening up Bhagavatam and showing us the secret energy that's inside it, the secret method, the message that's inside it. We know that in all of Srimad Bhagavatam, there's no mention of Radharani. Her name is not said once. There's no mention of Mahaprabhu. There's no mention of the appearance of Radha Krishna. All these things are hidden in the text. So very much of what the scholars of Gaudiya Vaishnavism do is to show, by meditating and discussing, where Radha is hiding in the text of Bhagavatam. This we see on every page of Chaitanya Charitamrita and on most of pages of Rupa Goswami and Jiva Goswami and others. So if we sink deep into this text, we open our hearts to this text and not just read the words on the surface, we will find depth and we find feeling and we'll find meaning and we'll find the loving energy of Radharani. I'm not the one to discover this. Gurudev is not the one to discover this. All of the wise members of our parampara have discovered this. And in many ways, their task is to show that the essence of the divine, which is Bhagavatam, is also the essence of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So what we'll try to do when we read this introduction, it's just 3 or 4 pages, is we'll try to follow Prabhupada into that secret message. Actually, Prabhupada's very direct. He goes right in and says, look, there's a secret message in this book. Don't waste your time thinking it's just on the surface. It's not just all the little stories and leelas that you read about on the surface of Bhagavatam. There's a secret message everywhere. And Prabhupada says it, we'll come to it in 1 minute. Prabhupada says it in the very first 2 lines. He said, look, don't think it's that, because it's much deeper. So we'll see that it's very, very nice. One last word about Prabhupada's commentary, because we should give our respects to that, show our respects to that. Very early on in his spiritual life, Prabhupada's life, in the 1950s, when he was almost 60 years old already, on the inspiration and with the guidance of his own guru, he decided he wanted to make Srimad Bhagavatam available to the greater world. And mostly this meant translating, because aside from some marginal translations here and there, it had not been completely translated. So he, shortly after taking sannyasi, at the age of around 60, he started translating and commenting. And so this introduction to Canto 1 is one of the very first texts that he wrote, in the very first phase of his project to translate this book for all the world. And as everyone knows, later on, and actually only 10 years later, after he started translating, then he went to America and began to spread the message. But the project started with the page we're going to read today. The project started then. We don't know for sure, but sometime in the late 1950s, he sat down and he translated the first verse. And he commented. And already in the first line, he tells us we need to have a personal relationship with Krishna. That's the first message already at the beginning of this project, which would keep him busy all the rest of his life. He said, look, I want you to introduce you to a friend. I want to introduce you to someone you can have a relation with. And by doing that, I want to change your idea of what God is. So from this very first page, he's introducing Bhakti Yoga. So you may not know the story. Then He translated mostly the 3 first cantos, which is also already very big project. He translated 3 cantos before he left for America in 1967. And he took them with him, a few copies of his in his suitcase, on the boat to America. Just a fantastic story. And then along the way, and during the next 10 years, he continued to translate. And he translated just about all, not the 12th to the 13th cantos. These were translated by his disciples after his disappearance. But he translated up to the 10th canto, which is the most famous one and maybe the most important one. So that's kind of the material introduction to the story. It's a very beautiful story, and the Leela of Prabhupada is, if we mix it together with the friendship and love that he pours into his work of translating and preaching, it's really very moving. So I really encourage you to read about that and study that while you're reading and meditating on Bhagavatam. So let's look at the first line then of this introduction. I have it right here. I have it on my screen. Like I said, he does not waste time, Prabhupada. He takes us right into the matter at hand. He says, the conception of God and the conception of the absolute truth are not on the same level. The conception of God and the conception of absolute truth are not on the same level. And we're going to try to understand what he means by God and what he means by absolute truth. That's the task for today. But first, the second sentence is then the Srimad Bhagavatam, this book that he's starting out writing or translating, hits on the target of the absolute truth. In other words, he means this book is interested not in God, but in absolute truth. Its target, its aiming, it's trying to understand, it's trying to penetrate into what absolute truth is and not what God is. But one more line, and then we'll start to try to understand what he's meditating on here. The conception of God indicates the controller, whereas the conception of the absolute truth indicates the summum bonum, or the ultimate source of all energies. So summum bonum, this is a modern, it's a Latin expression, which we use to say the essence. But actually, if you know a little Latin, you know that it means literally summum, all, bonum, good, all that is good. But we usually translate the essence, everything that is there. But it's interesting to remember that it actually means everything that is good. So I repeat this line. The conception of God indicates the controller, whereas the conception of the absolute truth indicates the summum bonum, or the ultimate source of all energies. So it's quite clear at first, in one level, God means the controller, absolute truth means the source of all energies. The source of all energies. So if we want to go deeper here, we need to remember that in the Vaishnava tradition, there are 3 dimensions of God, 3 aspects. There are 3 ways of understanding God, 3 ways that God functions, 3 ways that God exists in the world. These are Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. At any time when we're thinking or talking about God, all three are present, but some are stronger than others. Some are more present than others. Some are more dominant than others. Brahman means impersonal God. Brahman means reality itself. Everything that is. You could almost say the creation. It's endless. It has no form. It has no characteristics. It's just what is. That's Brahman. It's everything. It's a very powerful idea. If you say God is everything, that is very strong. That's something to understand, to feel. The second aspect of God is Paramatma. And we sometimes translate this in English as super soul. Because you know that Atman means soul or self. And Paramatma is the collection of all souls. The soul above all the souls. Para means above or behind. The soul behind all the souls. So if you consider all the individual souls in the universe, the Paramatma is the sum of all these souls. So God is all the souls of the universe put together. And that means something very special. That means that in you, in your soul, or your soul is a little atom of the soul of God. A little atom of the soul of God is in you. You are already divine. You are already godlike. You are already whatever God is. And that means that God is present in the world through you, through every individual Atma. And then if we think that a jiva is an Atma placed in a physical body, then we can say that God is present in every jiva. Finally, the third aspect of God is called Bhagavan, which Prabhupada usually translates as Krishna. And we sometimes also translate as personality of Godhead. And this is a completely different understanding of God. This is God, as the name says, with a personality, with qualities, with attributes, with a form, with different ways of looking, with different ways of feeling, with different ways of appearing as an avatar, different ways of incarnating. And most important for us, Bhagavan means God with different ways of having relationships to the jivas. Since God is personal, God is personality of Godhead, this means that God engages in personal relations with the jivas. There's a direct link between your soul and the soul of God, a direct relationship, if only you realize it. And our path in bhakti is to realize our relationship with God and to understand that relationship is one of feeling. So in the idea of Bhagavan is all the wonderful components of bhakti. That our relationship to God is one of feeling, that feeling stems from our soul, which is part and parcel of God, that God manifests himself personally and with feeling and because of feeling. So all this universe of emotions and feelings that we talk about so much in bhakti, these are present in this idea of Bhagavan. This understanding of God as relation, as personality, is clearly present in the appearance of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu for two reasons. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appears as a devotee of Krishna, and through his leelas, through his way of behaving and living in the world, he shows what a relationship of a devotee to Krishna is. He appears as a devotee, and that devotee is full of love, and he shows this love with everything he does. And the second way that he shows this loving relation is by explaining how, on the spiritual plane, God appears as Radha and Mohan and lives out a loving relation to itself. So what we call the Vrindavan Leela or the Vraj Leela, the story of Radha and Mohan, is the story that's carried to us by the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, taught to the Goswamis and passed along in the parampara, in our heritage, as an understanding of the kind of activities that happen in the soul. So one very nice way of understanding all these stories that we read in the Velapa Kusumanjari and the Radharasa Sutta, these are all happening in our soul, in the heart of every one of us. They're happening on the spiritual plane, and that spiritual plane is also our Svarup, our spiritual identity. So what Chaitanya teaches to his devotees, and what these devotees teach to us, is that that loving relation is what our soul is made of. So clearly, this is the personality of Godhead. But with also the other two components, much more weakly, I hate to say that, but much less strong, much less dominant. So the idea of Brahman, that God is reality, this is present in Chaitanya. The idea of Paramatma, that Chaitanya has a relation to every individual soul, this is prominent in Chaitanya as well. But the main aspect of God in the form of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is this personality, this idea that God is an entity whose meaning comes from our relationship to it. So whenever we want to advance our spiritual practice, whenever we want to have a spiritual experience, the door to open, the first step of that experience is saying, what do I feel in my soul? This is the roadmap to a relationship with God. What am I feeling? Where are my feelings coming from? What is the heart? What is the source of my feeling? How can I follow those feelings back to my heart? Because when we follow feelings back to our hearts, we come closer to our heart, we come deeper into our heart, and our heart is that part and parcel of the divine. The message of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is that the path to God is the path to the feelings of our own heart. That we need to understand in order to take the next step in Prabhupada's very short but very important explanation. And now let's see the next thing he says. He's talking now about the controller. That's what we need to understand now. God is a controller. He says, there's no difference of opinion about the personal feature of God as the controller, because a controller cannot be impersonal. Well, there's no difference of opinion between us. We mostly agree. But there might be difference of opinion with other beliefs and other kinds of groups, but that's not our concern. The important thing about what he says is here that a controller is not impersonal. So God controls a certain number of things. God creates. God controls the energy of the world, both the material energy and the subtle energy, which is in our minds and our bodies and in our memories, and the internal energy, which is the energy of our souls. But what Prabhupada says here is that that controlling happens in a very special way for us. It doesn't happen by force. It doesn't happen by power. It doesn't happen by fear. It doesn't happen because I have a big stick and I say, you do what I tell you. It happens because I have a relation to you. I am dependent on the divine because I have a loving relation with the divine. You are dependent on the divine because of your feelings for the divine. You are object of the energies of the divine because you are engaged with your heart in that. So this controller means some kind of supreme being, one who creates and one who sustains the universe and one who maintains the universe. But it's not by fear and by power and by authority that this control happens. It's through mystery and intimacy and feeling and admiration and longing and wanting and greed. It's not through fear that God controls the universe. It's through relation. It's through love. And Prabhupada tries to explain this a little bit more deeply now by comparing to democracies, which is a very complex topic these days, but let's try. He says, of course, modern government, especially democratic government, is impersonal to some extent. But ultimately, the chief head is a person. And the impersonal feature of government is subordinate, it's lower, to the personal feature. So we like to say, Prabhupada's saying, we like to say democracy, oh, it's impersonal. I vote for the guy who agrees with my beliefs, and then that guy does what I want. And Prabhupada says, yes, that's true. It's impersonal, no personal relation. You don't need to know the prime minister personally. You don't need to know the president personally. He's doing what the voters say, or she's doing what the voters say. And Prabhupada says, yes, that's true a little bit. But actually, that is only possible if that person is a person, if that leader has a relation to his people, if that leader has feelings, maybe only tiny feelings. But that impersonal relation with a democratic leader is only possible if there's a real person who's filling the role. Someone who has a feeling of responsibility. Someone has a feeling of right and wrong, maybe. Someone who has a feeling for what the people are feeling, for what the people want. So Prabhupada's trying to tell us that it may look like things are impersonal, but even the most impersonal relation, if it can have any relation to you, it's a personal one. Think about the most foreign person you've ever met. A complete stranger on the street. Completely impersonal relation. You've never talked to the person before. You don't know who it is, what the name is, where they come from, what they're doing, nothing at all. It's completely impersonal. Right? Well, wait a minute. If it's impersonal, if it's not even a person to you, you wouldn't even see the person. You would just see something looking like a tree standing there. You would walk right by, you wouldn't even see it. But the moment you say, that's a person, that stranger on the street, that's a person, even if you don't know them, you have a personal relation. There's a tiny gram of personality. There's a tiny gram of love. There's a tiny gram of connection. So here's a bhakti challenge for you. I dare you to go out on the street and try to have an impersonal relation with anybody at all. And I believe you'll find that it's impossible. Even if you meet someone you're nervous about, it's personal. Even if you meet someone you're scared of, it's personal. Or if you meet someone you think is beautiful, it's personal. If you meet someone you're indifferent to, it's personal. There is no relation that does not have love flowing in it. There is no relation that's not personal. The greatest of all these relations is the relation we have to God. Any relation to any other soul is personal. You cannot see another human being without seeing a tiny little corner of that person's soul. And when you do, you have a relation. So what kind of control does this kind of relation give to God? What kind of control are we talking about? Well, Prabhupada goes further and asks about control. He says, so without a doubt, whenever we refer to control over others, we must admit the existence of a personal feature. If I have no relation to you, you can't make me do anything. I'm sorry. If I don't see another soul, there's nothing you can do. You cannot touch me. You cannot have any control over me. So when there's another soul, there's a soul relation. When there's a soul relation, there's a control. And now Prabhupada uses the example of a kind of business. He says, because there are different controllers for different managerial positions, there may be some small gods. So if you think of a company with a boss and a lower boss and a lower boss, they're all relations to each other and they're all relations to us. But some are higher and some are lower. So in the universe, we also have small gods, demigods. We have acharyas, we have gurus, we have all sorts of people who have different levels of control. According to Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada says, any controller who has some specific extraordinary power is called a vibhutimat sattva, or controller empowered by the Lord. Vibhutimat means wonderful, glorious, super. And sattva, you might remember, means pure. So someone who's wonderfully pure, that we have a relation to, is directly empowered by God. And then Prabhupada says, there are many vibhutimat sattvas, controllers or gods with various specific powers, but the absolute truth is one without a second. So the absolute truth is something greater and more than a simple controller. And this is what we want to find out. That was the riddle, that mystery that Prabhupada put in the very first line. This is what we want to unpack, open up in our own hearts. This, he goes on, he's talking about this absolute truth still. He says, this Srimad Bhagavatam, so this book we're just about to read, and I'm just starting to translate. This book designates the absolute truth. It is the absolute truth. The absolute truth, or the summum bonum, as the Param Satyam. And you may maybe remember Param Satyam means ultimate reality. So Bhagavatam is Bhagavan, the relationship. It's Paramatma, the soul within the soul, and its ultimate reality, Brahman. It's all three in one. And that's how we understand the difference between controller and absolute reality, or Param Satyam. This book is absolute reality. Its object is absolute reality. It's more than the controller. It's more than the Bhagavan. It's also the sum of all the things that exist, and it's a sum of all the relations between the souls and the super souls. Again, Brahman, the absolute reality. Paramatma is the sum of all the souls, and Bhagavan, the supreme personality. The ultimate reality, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, is all three. And our task in our practice of bhakti is to understand how and why he is all three, why he's ultimate reality, absolute truth. We can start, and we'll go deeper, but we can give a first answer to the question. Mahaprabhu is Brahman because he is all energy. And in particular, the energy of the internal energy of Krishna, the pleasure-giving energy, the love-giving energy, which is embodied by Radharani. Mahaprabhu is that. Mahaprabhu is also Paramatma, because he is the little bit of soul in each and every one of us. Every bit of soul experience that you have, the feelings you have, the love you feel, the longing you feel, these are all the manifestations of the divine in you. These are all the expressions of the Paramatma in you. And then finally, Mahaprabhu is Bhagavan, Krishna, the personality, the one who has a million different relations with a million different kinds of souls. So Mahaprabhu is absolute truth because he is energy. He is soul within the soul, and because he is relation. In this sense, he is absolute truth. But mind you, this is just the beginning, because Prabhupada is going to go deeper now, even deeper. Let's continue. He says, the author of Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Vyasadeva, not really the author, but like I said, the one who puts it together. He put together all the parts of Bhagavatam. The author of Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Vyasadeva, first offers his respectful obeisances unto the Param Satyam, the absolute truth. Not to Bhagavan, not to Brahman, not to Paramatma, no. To the whole absolute truth. So now if you read the first verse of Bhagavatam, which I think we'll look at a little bit, but we won't take time. It's a very long and beautiful verse, but it tells all the different parts of the ultimate reality that he pays his respects to when he starts writing. So in a way, it's a summary of everything I just said. Prabhupada again, he says, Vyasadeva first offers obeisances unto the Param Satyam, and because the Param Satyam, the absolute truth, is the ultimate source of all energies, the Param Satyam is the supreme person. So here he says it's because of the energies that this is the absolute truth. The energies, including the material energy of Krishna, the subtle energy, which is the energy of our minds and intelligence and memories, and most importantly, the internal or spiritual energy, which is the energy of our hearts. And the most important of those energies, you all know it, is Ladani Shakti, the energy of giving pleasure, the energy of love, embodied by our dear Radharani. Prabhupada goes on now and says, the gods or the controllers are undoubtedly persons, but the Param Satyam, the absolute truth, from whom the gods derive powers of control, is the Supreme Person. So that we know there are lots of gods and demigods and powerful people and powerful gurus, and there's a whole microcosm of strong souls, important souls. But all of these receive their energy and receive their feeling from this absolute truth, this Param Satyam. And that's why it is the highest. The Sanskrit word Ishvara, says Prabhupada, which means controller, conveys the import of God, the message of God, but the Supreme Person is called Parameshvara, or the Supreme Ishvara. So you can talk about the controller. Yes, there is a control. Yes, God is controlling things through relationships. But beyond that, higher than that, is the energy, is the Paramatma, and the relation. All of these embodied in the life and conduct of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Srila Prabhupada continues now. The Supreme Person, or excuse me, or Parameshvara, the Supreme Ishvara, is the Supreme Conscious Personality. So this Absolute Truth is a personality. This Absolute Truth is an entity that has relationships with the jivas. And because he does not derive any power from any other source, he is supremely independent. The power of all his energies is already included in him. The power, these different classes of energy, the internal spiritual energy, the subtle intellectual energy, and the Maya, the material energy, these are always already included, always already flowing through the Supreme Person, the Parameshvara. That's what it is to be the Supreme Person. He is supremely independent. In the Vedic literatures, Brahma is described as the supreme God. Brahma was this idea of absolute reality, all the things that exist. He's described as the supreme God, or the head of all gods like Indra, Chandra, and Varuna. But the Srimad Bhagavatam confirms that even Brahma is not independent as far as his power and knowledge are concerned. So we can imagine all of reality. We can imagine God being everything that exists in the creation. Even beyond that, there is more. The energy that gives life and love and living to that creation is greater than that creation. That greater creation is the Parameshvara, the supreme controller, the supreme creation. So even beyond all that is, there is relation. Even beyond all that is, there's energy. There is relationship. The Srimad Bhagavatam confirms that even Brahma is not independent as far as his power and knowledge are concerned. He received knowledge in the form of the Vedas from the Supreme Person, who resides within the heart of every living being. So the message, the relationship comes from something higher than Brahman, but even more, the Supreme Person, this Supreme Personality, resides within the heart of every living being, resides within the heart of you and me. That's the idea of Paramatma. So the Paramatma, the sum of all the souls, that little bit of God in you and me, this is greater than Brahma, and the personality of Godhead is greater than Brahma. Prabhupada goes on and says, the Supreme Personality knows everything directly and indirectly. Individual, infinitesimal persons who are part and parcels of the Supreme Personality, that's us, that's you and me. We may don't know directly and indirectly everything about their bodies or external features, but the Supreme Personality knows everything about both his external and internal features. So this is trying to explain how we are dependent, but the Supreme Personality is not dependent. We don't need anything. We're independent in terms of knowing about what the temperature is in Vrindavan. We can know whether we're hungry or not. We can know whether the book is on the table or not. We're independent for these things. But we're not independent about knowing who we are in our souls. In order to understand who we are spiritually, we are dependent on the personality of God. So jivas are both independent and dependent, but God is independent of everything. He depends on nothing else. Mind you, we have to come back to this detail. It's really not a detail, it's a very big detail. When we say that the personality of Godhead is independent, we are saying that this personality of Godhead is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and that he is including Mohan and Radha and Manjari, and that the dependency on Manjari, the dependency on Radha, is part of the totality of the Absolute. God consists of this energetic movement, which is the divine pastime of Radha and Mohan. God is this loving relation between Radha and Mohan. God is this relishing of the divine relation through Manjari Bhav. God is nothing more than this, but nothing less than this as well. So when we say that God is independent, we don't mean that God is independent of Radha. We don't mean that God is independent of Manjari. We mean that that dependent relation is God itself. That dependency is God, and beyond it, there's nothing more. Now Prabhupada is going to comment on the very first verse of Canto 1 of Bhagavatam. And we can look at it a little bit briefly, but I think it will take an hour to talk about it in detail. He says, the words Janmadhya Asya suggest that the source of all production, maintenance, or destruction is the same in the Supreme Consciousness. Put my light on here, because my power went off. Yeah. And then it comes back on. Thank you very much. Every time my power comes back on, I thank my Gaurasundara and all those who contributed to the Prem generator outside. So let's look very briefly at this very first verse and see what Prabhupada is talking about. He said, I repeat, Janmadhyasya suggests that the source of all production, maintenance, or destruction is the same. Supreme Conscious Person. It's all one. Creation, destruction, maintenance, it's all part of the same system. And it's all embodied in the being of Srila Prabhupada. So the very first verse of Canto 1 is Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Vasudevaya. In other words, Om Namo, I give my obeisances to Lord Vasudev, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Vasudev is both the name of Krishna and the name of the father of Krishna, seems to me. Vasu means to dwell in, and Deva means in being. So Vasudev, strictly speaking, literally means what is living in every being, what has beauty and wisdom and power within every being, what is protecting every being, what is maintaining every being, and what is inspiring loving relation in every being. And that's why this verse, now that's the one that Prabhupada started to cite, Janmadya Ashyayato, Nivadyad Ataritas Chariteshva Abanyana Swarat. It's like this, the translation, whose creation, maintenance, and destruction precede him, who is omniscient and completely independent. So it's just a way of Prabhupada proving that all the energies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are within the Supreme Personality of Godhead, including the spiritual energies of loving relation, the subtle energies of memory and intelligence, and the material energies, the Maya energies, which keep the material illusion alive for the purposes it has.
Radha, Radha, my dear Uddhavaji.
Radhe.
Radha, we want to see you. You have no camera. Now you're here back. Oh, we miss you.
Oh my God,
Your voice is wonderful.
So attractive. You just think you're looking at Krishna, don't you? Yeah, the camera went off with the power, so now it's back on. Let's read the rest of this verse in the translation, maybe. So he's giving his obeisances, he's giving his respects to the one whose creation, maintenance, and destruction precede him, who is omniscient, so who knows everything, and completely independent. And like I said a moment ago, independent means that all the energies that make all the relations of feeling and activity and meaning in life, these are already completely contained in the personality of Godhead. There is no dependence on anything else. So the verse continues now, still giving respects to God. By him, the Supreme Lord, the Vedas, Brahma, are manifested within the heart of the original poet, Brahma, and by him even the greatest sages become bewildered. So the message of all this wisdom is not shouted down externally. It doesn't come as a message that we need to hear with our ears and learn from outside of us. It comes from our hearts. It's placed in our hearts. And when we read Bhagavatam, we don't get instructions from a grumpy teacher in the front of the classrooms who's tapping on the table and saying, remember, when we read Bhagavatam, the absolute truth appears in us. It's like a trigger. It's like a memory almost being provoked in our own hearts. I don't know if I should repeat it, but there's a very famous scene in one of the most famous novels in France where I live. It's a novel called In Search of Lost Time. And it's about remembering. And there's one scene where the narrator of the novel is walking down the street in Paris, and his foot catches on a stone in the street, and he trips. He doesn't fall down, he just trips like this, a jolt. And suddenly, he remembers a scene from his childhood 10 years before. Just by tripping on the cobblestone on the street, a door is opened in his heart and in his mind, and he can remember something. I don't know if you've had this experience where something just starts to remember in you, opens a feeling, and you remember something very deep and profound. This is what should be happening when we read Bhagavatam. This is what should be happening when we're chanting. This is what should be happening when we're singing kirtan. It's not a matter of receiving a message from beyond us. It's a matter of liberating the message which is already in our hearts. I can just finish the respects here of this verse. Just as the interactions of fire, water, earth result in various material creations, where the modes of material nature interact truthfully, let us meditate upon the supreme truth, whose own effulgence dispels all illusions and who is the ultimate reality. Again, this is very, very profound. Just as the interactions of fire, water, and earth result in various material creations, where the modes of material nature interact truthfully. In other words, we can put material things together and magical things happen because the material things are interacting truthfully according to their energy. In the same way that fire and water and earth can result in unexpected things materially, when we meditate on the supreme truth in our own hearts, then magical things will be created spiritually in us. And the fire and the light and what's created by these material interactions will clear away illusions, and then we will see ultimate reality. Just as combining material elements creates unexpected material things, combining spiritual elements creates unexpected spiritual things. So then we can really ask, before we kind of wind down to the end of this beautiful introduction, who is Bhagavatam speaking to? Whoop. Thank you, Gaurasundara. Only 5 seconds. And Gaura ran to the door and turned it on. Who is Bhagavatam speaking to? Yes, it says thank you to the gods, to the Creator. Respect and obeisances. But it's also saying thankful to the energy, the personal energy of the Creator, the personal energy of God, whose energy creates personal effects inside of us, in our own hearts. The energy of this book touches the energy of our hearts. And if it touches it purely, if we uncover, if we enter into our hearts, if we clear away the path to our svarupa, our spiritual identity, then this energy of this book will become the energy of God Himself. If we read it with no soul, like, I don't know, a mathematician, I hate to talk badly about mathematicians because I love them. If we read Bhagavatam like a mathematician, then there'll only be math that comes out. But if we read it like a devotee, then it's devotion that will come out. What this book tells us depends on the heart with which we read it. if we started with the book that we're atheists, there's no such thing as God, this is exactly the message it will give us. If we start from our deepest soul, then the message we'll get is the deepest information about our soul. So Bhagavatam is addressed to God, to the divine inside of us. And it's an encouragement to open and cultivate the divine inside of us so that we can hear the message. Cultivate the divine inside of us by clearing away all the nonsense, the material coverings, the distractions. And we all know what these are. And we all know how difficult it is to do that. So it's about the energy. And this is where Prabhupada finishes his conversation in the introduction here. No matter what your spiritual beliefs, if you're a fully realized soul or if you're an atheist, you believe in energy. Even the most distant astrophysicist thinks and knows that it's energy that created the world. He knows that it's energy that makes the planets turn. He knows it's energy that holds my coffee cup to my table. He knows that it's energy that holds me to this chair. He knows it's energy that makes my heart beat. And if you push him a little bit, he knows also that it's energy that makes me feel things that I feel. It's all energy. And this is where natural science and spirituality come perfectly together. They both believe in energy. And this is the clue to the meditation of Prabhupada here as he completes the introduction. And I'll read him a bit more now. He says, even in our present experience, we can know that nothing is generated without inert matter, but that inert matter, so dead matter, can be generated from the living entity. So wherever we are, whatever we believe, we know that there's matter and there's energy. If we're fully realized, we know that there's matter and jivas and souls. But even if you're not believing anything, you believe that there's matter, there's dirt, and then there's the energy we put into the dirt to make a brick. Then we use the brick to make a house, etc., etc. For instance, by contact with a living entity, the material body develops into a working machine. So you take a human body, you put some energy in it, and you have a human jiva. There was a wonderful debate when Prabhupada was living in San Francisco. He got into a public debate with a scientific man who said there's no such thing as soul. Nonsense. The soul is nonsense. And Prabhupada said, yes, of course there's soul. And it just so happened in San Francisco at the time, there was a scientific museum in which there were hundreds of bottles on display in the museum. And in all the bottles, there was one bit of every material element of a human body. I don't know how many different elements that is, something hundreds. Several hundred things make up a human body. You have some water, you have some cells, you have this kind of molecules and that kind of molecules. We know all of these things, all the things that are the material parts of the human body. So Prabhupada said to the scientists, very good. We know that you say that a human body is only material. Now let's go to the museum and we'll take a big pot and we'll put all the different things from all the different elements of the human body and we'll put them in a pot and we'll stir. And then you'll show me the human being that comes out of there. And of course, everyone laughed at the scientist and he was very embarrassed. And the point is, of course, that everything is there except the soul. When the soul leaves the body, then the body is material. When the soul is in the body is the body, is a jiva. Atma in Latin means breath. When the last breath leaves the body, the Atma has left the body. So he's saying we all believe in this energy. Come on. This is the original source of material energy, but it's also the original source of spiritual energy. And I continue to read now. Prabhupada says, this fact is expressed in all the Vedic literatures and all the exponents of spiritual science, the believers in spiritual science, they have accepted this truth. Living force is called Brahman, this energy. And one of the greatest acharyas, the teachers, namely Shripad Shankaracharya, has preached that Brahman is substance, whereas cosmic world is category. So you can have all the energy, all the material energy you want, but without spiritual energy, you don't have the cosmos. He goes on now, and we'll finish. The original source of all energies is the living force, and he is logically accepted as the Supreme Person. He is therefore conscious of everything, past, present, and future, and also of each and every corner of his manifestations, both material and spiritual. An imperfect living being does not even know what is happening with his own personal body. He eats his food, but does not know how this food is transformed into energy or how it sustains his body. When a living being is perfect, realized, he is aware of everything that happens. And since the Supreme Person is all perfect, it's quite natural that he knows everything in all detail. This is actually a definition of realization. What is a being who is realized? What does it mean to be realized? It means to know what is real, to real eyes. Or as Gurudev so sweetly says, to see with real eyes, real eyes with real eyes. Perfect. So someone who's realized knows what this is around us, knows what happens when I eat, knows what my body is, knows what my table is. When all this is realized, we are fully liberated. There's no blast off into the stars in realization. There's no travel to a foreign planet. There's no trance. There's no walking in the stars. Realization means seeing the spiritual energy in everything. Looking at you and seeing soul, looking in my book and seeing soul, looking in my table and seeing soul. This is what realized means. It's nothing more complicated than that. A realized person looks everywhere and sees nothing but spiritual energy, nothing but soul. That is what realization is. And that's what God sees. God doesn't see any material bodies. God sees only souls. God cares only about your soul. God cares only about the soul of my table. Doesn't care about the material stuff about my table. That's just temporary. Consequently, the perfect personality is addressed in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So this book is talking to that person who sees only soul. The more we see only soul, the more we understand Bhagavatam. And every day if we meditate, every day if we go deeper into our Svarup, we'll understand Bhagavatam. The bad news is, I'm afraid, my friends, is it means we need to start Bhagavan over again every day because we see it completely differently every day. So Gurudev always says he's read Chaitanya Charitamrita many times, but now that he's read Vilapkusvanjari, he reads it and it's a new book. Same thing with Bhagavatam. Every time we read, it will be a new book. Consciousness means consciousness of the soul. Consciousness of the soul means consciousness of spiritual energy. Consciousness of spiritual energy means consciousness of relation. Consciousness of relation means consciousness of feeling. All of this is clearly explained in Bhagavatam, says Prabhupada, and the reader has ample opportunity to study this critically. And so at last he arrives. Where does he arrive at the end of the introduction? With Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Prabhupada says, in the modern age, Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Ki Jai, preached Srimad Bhagavatam by practical demonstration. So this book that you and I have, same book that Mahaprabhu had. But instead of going around reading it like poor old soul I am doing and talking about it, Mahaprabhu showed it. He lived it. He realized it. He read this book from his soul and he saw only soul. And when he saw only soul, he didn't need this material thing anymore like I do and you do. He could just go out and live in the world, and he was Srimad Bhagavatam. He was a perfect devotee. He was like a walking book. You can also almost make a cartoon picture of Srimad Bhagavatam, of Prabhupada being the walking Bhagavatam. That's what he was. He didn't talk about it, he was it. He is it. So then it comes to something really beautiful, and Prabhupada he says, let's see, it's imperative that one learns Srimad Bhagavatam, now listen, from the person Bhagavatam. It's no good learning it from Uddhava. No use. You must learn it from God himself. And which God? The God inside you. You must come into your soul, which is the soul of God, and learn Bhagavatam from that. Bhagavatam is not the book, it's the soul in the book. It's not a person, it's the person in the soul in the book. Coffee cough, excuse me. Prabhupada says, and completes now, I keep saying I'm going to stop, but I am really. He says, the person Bhagavatam is one whose life is Srimad Bhagavatam in practice. And who is that? Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Since Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the absolute personality of Godhead, he is both Bhagavan and Bhagavatam in person and in sound. So he doesn't need this heavy book. It's much easier for him. He just carries it in his soul. Therefore, the process of approaching Srimad Bhagavatam is very practical for all the world. You don't even need to read it. You need to go into your svarup. You need to go into your soul, and it's already written there. It's like an audiobook. You've already downloaded it into your heart. So all you need is to go into your heart, and the book is waiting for you there. It was his wish, so Mahaprabhu's wish, that Srimad Bhagavatam be preached in every nook and corner of the world by those who happen to take their birth in India, which is what Prabhupada then did, of course. The Srimad Bhagavatam is the science of Krishna, the absolute personality of Godhead, whom we have preliminary, so basic information from the text of Bhagavad Gita. The science of Krishna is Bhagavatam. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has said that anyone, regardless of who she is, who is well versed in the science of Krishna, can become an authorized preacher or preceptor in the science of Krishna. There is a need for the science of Krishna in human society for the good of all suffering humanity of the world. And we simply request the leaders of all nations to pick up this science of Krishna for their own good, for the good of society, and for the good of all world's people. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Jai Jai Shri Radhe, Jai Jai Shri Radhe. There we have a little bit of an introduction to what we're talking about. Please feel free to share or as you like. As you might know, right after that introduction comes, because Prabhupada thought it's so very important, there comes a longer biography of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So this introduction I just discussed was about 4 pages, and then comes about 10 pages, 12 pages of the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu life. And then at the very end of this introduction comes the 8 Shikshastakam that we sing every day in temple, and that you could read and chant yourselves at home. So this little introduction, which I also sent to you by PDF a moment ago, it's available everywhere. I really encourage you to read it and relish it. Jai Shri Radhe, Jai Gurudev. Thank you.